This is episode number 22 of the Expert Table Tennis podcast and part 2 of my interview with Marc Burman. Now, if you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I recommend you go back and listen to that in episode 21. Back in part 1 of the interview, we spoke about the unusual circumstances that led Marc to start a table tennis club at the age of 16. Then we got into talking about what Marc could remember about me when I turned up to his club at the age of about 9 years old. We talk about some of the training drills that we did and what Marc remembers from me starting off my journey in table tennis about 16 years ago. And then Marc goes on to share a number of different stories and experiences that he has picked up and accumulated along the way through almost 30 years of table tennis playing and coaching. He shares a few examples of stories from players such as Carl Preen and Jean-Michel Save. So there was loads of stuff in there that was really interesting. If you haven't listened to that yet, definitely go and check that out. In today's episode, part 2, Marc continues to talk about the importance of having a good attitude in order to become a top table tennis player. He shares some more stories and he also gets much more into some real practical tips, and there's maybe 6 or 7 real practical tips that he shares in the second half of this episode today that's really going to help you improve as a player. So I hope you enjoyed this episode and you make full use of Marc's wisdom and experience and go away and apply everything that he says to your own game. I'm sure if you do that, you're going to see some really impressive results. Okay, it's time to get going. Part 2 of my interview with Marc Burman. Well, we've spoken a little bit about attitude. I'd like to ask you kind of what is the ideal attitude of a player that's going to be able to become a top player? What are the kind of things that you're looking for in a player, and what are the things that you're trying to develop?
I think a really important thing is keenness to begin with. They have to be interested, and as we spoke about earlier, the coach or the club should ideally try and create an environment that's going to foster keenness. Yep. Not everybody, you're not going to help everybody, because some people just, they're not that interested, but table tennis is a great sport, and I don't know many people that don't like it. But if you've got someone that's keen to get better, that's the essential ingredient. And that for me is really important. And then what you've got to do is educate them on what the right attitude should be. And one of the big things that I do is I focus on getting the players to understand that about the winning and losing. For example, a lot of players associate a good performance with a good result, or a bad performance with a bad result, or which is not the best focus, because the problem is that I've seen players who play badly, play terribly, in fact, really under par, give up halfway through and then start trying again, but manage to scrape along the line and get a win. And then they come over and go, that was terrible. Why did you play? Why did you give up during the game? Well, I won, didn't I? and I go, yeah. You played really badly. And then equally, you get players who play fantastically well, play the best they've ever played, lose juice in the fifth, and come off and throw their bat in the bag, or throw the bat across the room, and they're really angry because they've lost. And then you go up to them and say, well, look, you actually played better than you've ever played before. You shouldn't be focusing purely on the result. You should actually be focusing on your performance and your improvement. And it made, through my experience, it made me realize that everybody's going to win and lose at every level. It doesn't matter how good you're ever going to get. You're never going to solve the problem of losing. Yeah. And so it's about the level you get to. And therefore, because the level, it's all about trying to aim for the highest level we can get to. In order to do that, we need to focus on improvement and performance. So, for example, when one of the things I try and do is say to people, you need to focus on points targets. If you're going to play somebody who's too good for you, you're in a tournament, they're too good for you, this player, you're not going to win. Let's not delude ourselves, but you're going to go in there and try to win the most points you possibly can. Yeah. Set yourself a points target. What do you think realistically you're able to get? And they'll say, oh, I could probably get 5. Okay, 6 is your target. Yeah. If you get 6, it's effectively won. anything above 6 is fantastic. Because they're thinking then about getting 6 when they go in the match. When they do hit 6, big smile comes across their face. Yes, I've done it. And they keep trying all the way through the game. They don't give up at any point because they know that they're chasing 6. And once they do that, they come off and they say, okay, great, fantastic. Let's analyse your performance. Perhaps if we film it, we can look back at it. Where can you improve in your game to win more points next time against this person?
Yeah.
And then they identify those areas, and then you go away to the training hall and you start training on those areas that were weakness. And then you follow the routine of beginning to do it in training matches and then progress up to real matches. And as we mentioned earlier, and then when you play that same person again, you set a target of 7. And then you wash, rinse, and repeat. You do the same thing. They come off and eventually they get closer and closer and closer until they take a set against this person, and eventually they beat them. And by focusing on that, by focusing on improvement and performance, not the result, the results will come as night follows day. And you don't lose motivation. You don't lose, not going to get fed up because you're losing. Do you know what I mean? You're setting the goals at the right level.
Yeah, you do find, if you look at quotes from a lot of the top coaches from loads of different sports, they do often have like don't worry about the results. The score takes care of itself. All of those kind of quotes that just creates the attitude that you want in players.
That's it. There is a caveat to this. The caveat is that we want to try and get into the habit of winning also. And I think that you need to be playing in a competition where you're winning around about 60 to 70%. If you're losing all the time, it's very difficult because, people are naturally competitive. So you can't, I think it's important to recognize that also, that we want to get into the habit of winning, and it's important to find the right level of competition. And if you're winning 100%, you're too strong for the competition you're in. You need to find something else. And if you're losing all the time, you need to find competition that's more suited to your level. And again, aim for a competition or a league where you're aiming at, or a division where you're at 60 to 70%. But you're then applying the technique I just mentioned to the really good players. Yeah. But that also said, often people only analyse their performance when they lose. You should actually analyse it when you win as well. People often don't. They don't look at where they could have improved when they won.
Yeah, I remember seeing a quote from Waldner where he said he doesn't actually watch matches where he loses because it's going to knock his confidence. He just watches the matches that he won that were good, and then works out what he did that was good from that.
Well, that's it. Confidence is massive. Confidence is everything. And that's why, from what I've said and focusing on point targets, it's also important to bear in mind that winning majority of the time is important for your confidence levels, because we're all competitive, especially at a high level. It's interesting you talk about Waldner because one of the things that I went to one tournament a few years ago, and they the Swedes were there, and one of the things I heard that one of the coaches had said was that the Swedish players were playing. Sometimes they'd play somebody who wasn't particularly as strong as them. But what they would say to the player is, right, okay, I don't want you to play against the opponent's weakness. I want you to play against the opponent's strength.
Okay.
And I thought, at first when I heard that, I thought, what? Why would you do that? And then when I thought about it, it actually makes total sense because, you need to expose. Sometimes when you're developing and improving, if this is our focus, you're getting better, we need to not shy away from what the opponent's doing that's causing us problems. We need to sometimes embrace it and actually play against it more to get used to it. And that actually makes us stronger. And, obviously we've got to think about when we're going to do that because, if you're in an important tournament, you're not going to take the risk of, playing to someone's strength. But certainly if you're in a tournament where it's all about you improving and developing, then I think there's definitely something in that about focusing on your opponent's strengths, especially if you're definitely going to win.
Yeah. Like if you could win by doing like a side topspin serve that they can't return, And you could do that every serve you do, so that you win every point of your serve, because this person you're playing just keeps pinging off.
Yeah.
Or you could decide to just give them like a fast serve to their forehand, which they're going to be able to attack.
Yeah.
But then you're actually going to be able to try and counter or something. Then, yeah.
That was really effective. And I did this with Emma. Emma had a really good, and still has a very good, tomahawk serve. When she was like 12, I mean, a lot of the girls really struggled to handle it. And she played one girl at one tournament, and she was quite a lot stronger than this girl without the serve. And Emma went on, but this girl had quite a good backhand punch. But Emma went on and just did her tomahawk serves relentlessly, and the girl couldn't return a single one of them. Yeah. When she came up to me after the first set, I said, "Stop doing the serve." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Because you're not gaining anything from this match whatsoever. What we need to do is do a normal match. In fact, play to her punch, and then and practice returning her punch. Because you'll actually improve by doing that." She went on and did it, and and won the match. She still won the match. Whenever she got in trouble, she'd introduce the overhead serve if she did get
chuck in that serve for like a 3 point.
Yeah. Whenever she was a bit worried, but at the time she didn't quite understand where I was coming from and thought I was trying to make her lose. Yeah. But I when I explained it afterwards, she fully understood where I was coming from, and took that on board herself as she played, and got better and better. And that definitely is an important thing. And another thing that links through to this is, Gatien, Jean-Philippe Gatien, who was world champion, one of the best French players that's ever been produced. His coach, Jean-Michel Caudal, who's also worked for the ETT a number of years ago, Jean-Philippe Gatien played in the London Open one year, about 20 years ago. Okay. And he was the number one seed by miles. And I don't know for those listeners that are not familiar with Gatien, have a look at him on YouTube. But he had a tremendous forehand, an electric footwork, and everything was about bringing this forehand into play. His backhand was, in comparison to his forehand, was quite a lot weaker. He used to just run round all the time on his backhand.
He used to get away with that 20 years ago.
He did, yeah. Well, it's interesting because when he played in the London Open, which he was the number one seed, Michel Caudal said to him, "I don't want you to run round at all on your backhand. I want you to play. Every time that ball comes to your backhand, you have to play backhand. You have to win the tournament playing backhands when it comes to the backhand." He did it exactly what Michel Caudal said, and he went on and won the tournament. He never ran round once. And that was Michel Caudal's, he was endeavouring to improve his backhand. I thought,
and the weak players of London were perfect.
Yeah, they were guinea pigs. Yeah, they were like, yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I thought that that really kind of changed my view on things a little bit, and I realised actually, that's great. If we realise that it's about performance and it's about improvement, and winning some random tournament somewhere, is not. It's not really what it's about. If you want to get better, you should focus on improvement and performance. Then these kind of things are really what you should aim to do.
Yeah, definitely. Now, how do you strike the balance between constantly striving to be perfect in all of these things and having that like the super long-term mindset of, eventually it will all come together, and you're constantly like trying to play like that, compared to the kind of short term of just focusing on tactics and winning now? How are you able to kind of combine that in players? Because you do often find, and I spoke to Larry about this last week, that players tend to gravitate towards one or the other. And I think I was always a bit too long term, like not that worried that I wasn't getting results, because I was always thinking, well, I'm doing this for how good I'll be in a few years' time. But if it's always in a few years' time, then it never comes.
No, exactly. No, that's why I think it's important to find a competition, whether it be local league or tournaments, where you're able to win 60 to 70% of the time. Because I listened to the interview you did with Larry and totally agree with him 100% about tactics becoming a habit. And where you're winning 60, 70% of the time, you're going to build up that confidence and your ability to practice your tactics. If you're playing in a tournament where it's way too strong for you and you're losing all the time, then I think that doesn't benefit you at all. And I think equally, if you're playing in an event where you're way too strong for everybody else, unless you actually change your focus about what you're trying to achieve, you don't benefit from that either. And my point is that some players are totally dismiss winning or results as being important, and it's all about the long-term future. And I think that is a problem also, because I think you can then get into the habit of not winning is a habit. And that's why it's important to find something where you're winning 60 to 70% of the time, in order for you to be able to think, apply some of the things and the tactics and, the strategies to apply them and win with them. Do you know what I mean? I think that's important. And I think if you just solely think long term without actually considering the result at all, it's negative. It can be negative. So you've got to strike a balance.
Yeah. And for most people, that 60 to 70% is probably going to just come down to picking the local leagues and the divisions that they play in carefully, especially if you're in this country. I mean, Europe has more national leagues. I know that the US are looking to start up more leagues, but, do you want to play in the top division in your local league and win 20%, or would you be better off winning 80% in Division 2?
Definitely, 100%. I think a really important thing is trying to find opponents who are within touching distance of your ability. They're better than you, but they're within touching distance of you. So with a bit of improvement and application of strategy and other things, you can eventually beat them. But if they're miles ahead of you, then or they're miles ahead of where you are at the moment, then I think it will crush your confidence, especially if that happens too often. Yeah. So it's very important to be very careful about, if you're looking to improve, being very careful about selecting the right competitions and the right leagues and divisions to play in. Too strong, it's negative. Too weak, it's negative.
Yeah. Something else that I wanted to ask you about was, I mean, you have mentioned talent a few times when you've been talking about players and stuff. What are your views on talent and how important that is for players?
I think it's important. I think it is very important because it's interesting because we talked about Bounce. I've read the book Bounce. I'm a massive fan of that. I love the message that it's conveying, and it's very, very true that how much you put in, access to facilities, the coaching is a massive. A huge ingredient, whether you're successful or not. But I do think there is an X factor for what I've seen. There's an X factor that you need to be really good. And what is that X factor? Well, then what I would say is I think it's very much linked to your personality. Okay. I remember reading the book in Bounce and talking about Matthew Side talking about the Kingfisher Club, and how there was 3 national champions on one road, and that they all had access to the Kingfisher Club 24/7. They had Peter Charters as the coach, and that was a massive driving force in them becoming the players that they did, and producing the really good players. And I read that book and I think, that's fantastic. But I also thought, but if you take that model and replicated it in every single village and town in the UK, then maybe you would never have heard of Matthew Side. Because what would happen is the standards would, there'd be so many more people playing. And let's say there were 1,000 Kingfisher clubs, there'd be potentially 1,000 Matthew Sides. But out of those 1,000 Matthew Sides, there'd still be someone who's the best. So what would make that one the best? And what would make second, third, fourth, all the way down to 1,000? It would be something other than access to the facilities and coaching. And what I think that other thing is personality. Because I think the decisions you make in life are also reflected on the decisions you make on a table. The shots you choose to play on the table are reflective of you as a person. That's why people gravitate to play different styles. Because, as I say, that style is often reflective of them as a person. And a good example of this is there's a lad at Walden Park who all he wants to do is play flare shots all the time. That's more important to him than anything. And he can play some amazing shots, sort of fades and hooks and drop shots. He wants to do all of that kind of stuff, but he's more concerned with that than anything else. He's not particularly a strong player. And it's hard for me to get him to understand that, you know, there's more to it than just playing some fancy shots. And then he brought in a football one day, and whilst we were setting up the table, he was doing these football skills, and I couldn't believe the skills on him. And he was doing all these amazing flair skills with the football, and then it kind of just made me click. Yeah, this is him. This is his personality. This is who he is. He's quite outgoing and loud. And I realised that the personality that you have is indicative of how you're going to play table tennis or how you play any sport. I think there's a physiological side to it as well. But I definitely think personality plays a difference. And what makes personality? I mean, that's a whole other subject. But it's not something that's under particular control of any coach. What I think a coach can do is mould people, guide people, and as people get older, they accrue different experiences and they change. But ultimately, who they are is the essential ingredient behind whether they can achieve a really high level at sport or not. And that is what I define as talent.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if, as research methods and things get more advanced, that they start actually finding more things in people's personality that like I mentioned about people being obsessive about things, and how, to me, that definitely seems to be something that some people just have and others don't, which is massively beneficial. So that kind of goes against the idea that you can just pluck people at random. And
that's what I think. And from my experience of coaching, I and coaching thousands of kids and adults, juniors and adults, some people just haven't got the personality for competitive sport. They're not competitive at all. They don't like competition. They no matter what you do, no matter what you offer them and how much access to facilities got, they're just not gonna pursue that because it's not them. As I say, equally you get people that are just absolute laser beam focus that really want to be successful, and it's built into their personality and who they are. And as I say, I don't think that's something because everybody's different, aren't they? So I think certain personalities are more conducive to elite sport than others. But I think everybody, and I mean everybody, if they're keen on if they're keen and they want to improve, some of the ideas that we've talked about today, if they took those on board, and if they're not already doing them, I think that would certainly help them.
Yeah, well, let's throw out some advice to people now. So people that are listening to this podcast are keen. That's kind of like that's a given. They want to get better. Some of them are in decent clubs. Some of them are kind of going it alone, trying to just find ways to practice and just make the best of what they've got. What kind of stuff should they be doing? What do you think they should be focusing on? What's some of the things that you do with the players that you've coached to a high level that you've seen really work?
What I think they should do is, if you're an improving player and you want to get better, is you must embrace playing different styles. I think some people get bogged down with just practicing with the same person all the time, or one or two people. And the problem is with that is that you get used to that style. And then when you play a competition against somebody completely different, you can't handle it. And I think that what I encourage my players to do is, as soon as they find a player or an opponent they have particular problems with, that they should actually practice and play with them more and more and more until eventually they learn how to play them. And then they need to go on a mission to find someone else they struggle with and do the same with them, and so on and so on. And by embracing different styles and learning to play against different styles with particular focus on those you struggle with, that's a massive driver in improvement. I also get them to watch top players. That perhaps play similar to them. You can watch if you're lucky enough to watch them live or watch on YouTube. You learn an awful lot, and you see shots that you watch on YouTube or whatever, or live, and then it's amazing. Some of the kids that see that, they go and start trying it out themselves in the practice hall, and that's a great way of learning. And particularly if you're struggling to do a certain shot, record it if possible, and then watch it back and try and replicate it. That's an important thing. I think another thing that's really important is practicing lobbing and fishing. Because lobbing and fishing is quite often sort of a bit neglected in training, but I think it's absolutely essential. And in fact, I read the Warden has got a book that I read where he talked about when he was young, he did a lot of lobbing, and I really agree, because it gives you a great sense of where the other side of the table is from different parts of the court, whether you're close, medium, or far away. You've got an intuitive feeling of where the other side of the table is. Some players just train too close all the time and don't practice at different distances.
Yeah,
and don't practice lobbing. And lobbing and fishing gives you a great feel for the ball as well, which I think is an essential ingredient in being successful.
That was something that we really found when we were. Did you see much of the Expert in a Year stuff?
I did. I watched quite a lot of it. Yeah.
We were training in like Sam's cramped kitchen, so we didn't have any option to do smashing, lobbing, fishing, chopping, anything like a bit out of the ordinary. And later on, as the year progressed and we started going to other places, we'd always make use of the space, and we found that doing all this kind of messing around stuff had a huge impact on his game, and like his whole concept of how to play table tennis, how to return different shots, because we'd done loads of just like fast forehand backhand drills really close to the table, but then he was constantly surprised by anything that was different. And once we started, like, we did this thing where we'd just change the spin, so we'd start doing top spin, then one of us could chop and you'd do some chops, and one of you would top spin, you'd do some top spins and lobs, and that just sounds like nonsense, but that helped him so much, just doing weird stuff, lobbing, fishing, just it's just weird.
Yeah, well, I mean, it as I say, I think doing that kind of training is absolutely essential part of getting better, because, as I say, it gives you an intuitive and instinctive feeling to where the other side of the table is, and feeling when you're hitting the ball. And this links in quite nicely with another thing that I think works very well, is that as a player, you need to sort of have a recipe of different things that are going to help you get better. One of them is individual coaching. You also then need to have match play that goes side by side with that. So what happens in matches and how you perform and the results you get feed directly back into your training, and then you work on particularly the areas you're struggling with. And you create a feedback loop ultimately on that, and obviously there's some bits in between that we spoke about earlier, but I think it's important for you to have some group training. And one of the things I think is really important is trying to get a group of similar level players together. I'll give you an example. At the moment, I'm training a group of 3 lads who are playing for the county at Sussex at cadet level. Now, they are all at Walden Park, and they have become, 3 table tennis, really good friends with each other. So they've got a great bond. And what I do is I leave them, often I'll leave them to their own devices for a bit. And I've often noted that they start mucking around. But not mucking around in a silly way, but they start improvising and trying different shots out. And they start trying to chop. They start trying to do drop shots and sort of backhand side spins and forehand fades, and all of this kind of stuff. And you kind of thought, hang on, should they be doing that, or should they be training in a more religious way?
Yeah.
And I noted that actually, what they were doing in that mucking around experimentation practice. All of a sudden they'd play a match and those shots started to come out in a match, and I hadn't coached them to do it. I hadn't trained them at all to do that. They were suddenly doing fades and drop shots and an occasional chop when they were in trouble. And I'm thinking, wow, that is interesting. And I think that it's really emphasized that you need individual coaching with a good coach. You need to do match play, but you also need some time to try things out and improvise and experiment as well. And that gives you a great feeling on the ball, and is an essential component again to improving. And I don't think enough people do that type of thing. Definitely
not adults is what I've found.
Yeah, adults. and adults and girls, to be honest, and girls. The reason girls don't necessarily do it too much is because I find girls are really, really dedicated, and not that that's a bad thing, but they're really like they do exactly as they're told. They don't, they're very, this is a general rule, but they do exactly as they're told. They train amazingly well, a lot harder than boys, but the payoff is they don't necessarily break the rules and try to do some experimentation. Where the boys, it's hard to get their intention 100% of the time, and when they do sort of do that, they end up mucking around. But in fact, that probably gives them the range of touch and improvisation skills that you need to be good. I mean, I'm saying a general rule with girls because there are some girls that do that, but
sure.
I think there is a striking difference between the two, and adults tend to do exactly as you're telling them to as well.
Yeah. Mark, every week I ask the guest to give us a top tip. I'm wondering if you've got something that you'd like to share with us for that.
No, sure. I've got two, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, that's good.
The first one would be, when you're training and you're learning and you're developing, you should focus on good mistakes. What I call good mistakes and bad successes, basically. Players, sometimes when you're coaching them, they might put their finger up the middle of the bat, for example, and play a backhand from the forehand side, and it lands on the table, and they think I've been successful. But equally, they could do everything correct, go through, do everything to create the perfect technique, or as good a technique as they can for a forehand loop. They make a reasonably good contact, it tips the net and flies off, and they think they've failed. And I say, no, you did everything right there. That was a good mistake, and good mistakes are better than bad successes. Keep doing that. You have the right idea. If you keep doing it, it will go on. And if you associate that ball going on the table with success or not, it's not good. So I always emphasize to my players focusing on good mistakes and bad successes.
I think that's actually one of the, obviously there's loads of them, but one of the main things that a coach can offer is that kind of wisdom that stops you from just completely going down the wrong path strategically. Yes,
exactly. Yeah. I mean, it does make a big difference because, you could end up players getting, they do something that works, that's quite weird and awkward. And as I say, for example, playing backhands consistently from the forehand side, and it works, and they might beat some players doing that. And they carry on doing it because it's got them some limited success. And if they keep on doing it for too long, it ends up becoming stuck. They're stuck in their game. They can't change it. So I think as a coach, it's important to get them to change their mindset on that.
Sure. And what's the second tip?
The second thing is a lot of people have. I think this is one of the major things that I've discovered over the years about people competing is that expectations. A lot of people, when they play someone they're not expected to beat, they just go for it. They have no fear. They're just like, let's go for it. And they play really well often. As long as they're not too far ahead of, the player isn't too good for them, but they often play really well because they've got nothing to lose. But if they play somebody who they're expected to beat, who is good enough to beat them, but they are higher ranked, and there might be people watching the game who are also expecting them to win. Lots of people suffer from nerves and they can't handle it, and they underperform and lose to people they should be beating. And over time, I've evolved. My advice to them is that what you should do when you're playing somebody who is better than you, you should set a points target, but also your goal is to give them the best game you possibly can. Make them sweat. Make them come off having think, I worked really hard to win that, and go in there and with nothing to lose. When you play somebody you're expected to beat, who's good enough to beat you, this is the ultimate test. This is what separates the good people from the great people.
Yeah.
Which is you are able to perform when you're expected to and everybody else expects you to. And I think a great way of helping you achieve that is to go on with the mindset of saying, right, okay, I'm expected to beat you. Everybody else is expecting to beat you. And I'm going to show you why I'm better than you. I'm going to show you why I'm ranked above you. if you can beat me today, you are going to have to play out of your skin. You're going to have to play the best table tennis that you've ever played. And if you do so, I'll take my hat off and shake your hands. But you better get ready for a battle. And when they go on with that mindset, they're very, very tough to beat. And I think that you mentioned Alex Perry. When I was in Strasbourg, Alex Perry was out there, and I talked to him about this. And he said it was funny because he played in the English, the national championships, and he won it. And he hadn't practiced that much, and he went in it, and he said to himself, "Do you know what? I might not win today. I might not win this tournament, but I'm going to be blooming hard to beat.
Yeah,
everybody's going to have a fight on their hands." And he went in with that attitude, with no fear, and he won. He won the tournament. And I think that's a massive way, because lots of people go on against people who they expect to beat and get really nervous and scared and sometimes their hands start shaking and they lose.
Yeah.
I think if you think that way, it massively helps.
Yeah, I think that last tip is brilliant, because that is a situation that, from my experience, everyone struggles with at some point. You know, you go on against someone who's ranked 50 places above you. You lose 3-2, but you play an absolute blinder. And then the next game in your group is against someone 50 places below you that you're expected to beat. And all of a sudden you lose the first set, and you're like, I can't get any shots on anymore. And why am I not playing? And then, this afternoon I've got the lower band where I'm going to have to play loads of these people, and I'm going to lose so many points. Actually, I think I just don't really want to play that one. And it's just a constant like downward spiral of thoughts of, I think I'm just going to play the band above me where I get to play the better players. And, no one wants to be the top seed.
It's totally interesting you say that, because again, that's a lot of people do that. They shy away from putting themselves in positions where they're going to be placed under that kind of pressure. But again, it relates to what we said earlier. Embrace it. Embrace that situation. Put yourself in that situation as much as possible. Why? Because you get stronger and tougher dealing with it. And you get to practice and make that attitude a habit.
Yeah.
And so I'd say the more you put yourself in those type of uncomfortable situations, the better.
Yeah. If you're just constantly putting yourself up against people where you've got nothing to lose, it's the equivalent of just wrapping yourself up in cotton wool, isn't it? You're like, my ranking points are safe.
Yeah.
No one's expecting anything from me.
Yeah.
I can just go and have a good time, and then that's it. I'll go home. I'll be happy whether I win or lose, because I'm not meant to beat anyone. So
no, that's it. And that's why I think that, when you look at all the really top players, and not just at table tennis, but every sport, they have this uncanny ability to perform when everyone expects them to, and they expect to. And they seem to perform extremely consistently, and I know that that's related to their attitude to those situations, but also they're not afraid of putting themselves on the line. Yeah,
that has been extremely, extremely useful, I think.
Oh, great.
It's like, I'm trying to think like what kind of umbrella term is the kind of what we've been talking about today, because it's kind of been psychology, but I don't know. How would you describe what we've been discussing? Have you got any ideas?
I think it's attitude, really. It's
yeah, I guess it is.
Yeah, it's about an attitude. It's about how you approach things, and I think actually that when you strip it all back, it comes back to that original point that when you're coaching someone, or whether you're playing sport, if you're keen and if you really want to be good, you will find a way. That is the core driving force for then developing the right attitude, the right approach to practicing and competition. So I'd really say it was about your attitude and your approach.
Yeah.
That I would say is how you would describe it.
Brilliant. The attitude needed for success, and there's been so much good stuff in here. This will obviously be part 2 because it's been quite a long one, so I'll split it in half somewhere down the middle.
Sure.
But thank you so much for coming on, Mark.
No problem, Ben. I'm glad
it's been
to speak to you.
Brilliant talking to you. Yeah, and I feel like I was very lucky to stumble across your leisure centre as opposed to somewhere else, because I know things can be very different if different situations had come about or whatever.
Well, as I say, I know I mentioned it earlier. It's quite funny to think if I'd never have called Chelsea Football Club up, I never would have become a coach. Maybe you would never have played table tennis and do what you're doing now. So it's strange how fate works.
Yeah, it's mental. I think is that called like the butterfly effect or something like that? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, the butterfly effect, exactly.
Brilliant.
Cheers, Mark. Great to speak to you, Ben. Take care.
Yeah, you too.
Cheers.
Have a good day.
Angie, bye.
Bye. I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Marc for joining me on these last 2 episodes of the podcast. You can tell that Marc just absolutely loves studying table tennis and sport and psychology, and then applying all of it, thinking about how it relates to his own coaching. Marc just loves it. And I mean, I could have spoken to him for absolutely hours, and I'm sure I will at some other point. But yeah, I hope that you took a lot out of that. There was so much good stuff in there. So many practical tips that Marc was kind of throwing at us at the end. Things like, make sure you're playing different styles, watching top players, the importance of doing things like lobbing and fishing that, isn't part of your standard training. Yeah, there was just so much stuff in there. So I hope you really enjoyed that one. There's one thing that I want to draw out from that interview that Marc was saying kind of right near the start of this part 2. So you might have forgotten about it. And that's the whole relationship between winning and losing in table tennis. He said a couple of really good sound bites. One was winning as a habit. And I really like that idea that winning is a habit and you need to get into the habit of winning matches. The other thing is you're never going to solve the problem of losing, was something that he said. You're never going to solve the problem of losing. And this was something that Steve Brunskill actually said to me and Sam when we were up visiting him in Swerve as part of the Expert in a Year challenge. He was pointing out that, even the best players in the world, the Waldners, the Marlongs, the whoever, the real top players, they play hundreds of matches throughout a season and they lose a lot of them. Like, you're never going to solve the problem of losing. You're never going to win every game. So if that's what you're trying to do, win every single game, and and you get really distraught if you're ever losing matches, that's just not the right attitude. So I found that really interesting. And Marc's idea that you want to try and find somewhere where you can be winning 60 to 70% of your matches. I think that is a really good piece of advice, because we see way too many players either playing in divisions and local leagues that are too weak for them, just winning too easily, and they're not really getting anything from it. Or you see, even as part of the Expert in a Year challenge, we had Sam going around the tournament circuit, and I reckon his win rate was probably about 10%, which meant that, and we wrote about this a bit in the book, that he never got into that habit of winning because he was just used to turning up, trying his best and losing. And that was the habit that he got into. And I think it is really important that you're able to find somewhere where you are winning 60 to 70%, more than half, but not 90, 100% where you're just too strong for the people that you're playing. So pick your tournaments carefully. Pick your local league or your national league that you're playing carefully. I'm probably playing in slightly too high a British league at the moment, playing in Division 1 South, where I struggle to win more than half of my matches. Like if I got half in Div 1 South, I'd be very happy. Maybe that's not good for me, but then at the same time I'm playing in local league and I probably am going to win 60 to 70% or more. So I don't know, but that's something that I think is really interesting. You're never going to solve the problem of losing, is something to remember. Winning is a habit, and look for those places where you're going to be able to win 60 to 70% of your table tennis matches. I'll be back in a week's time with a brand new guest. You've been listening to the Expert Table Tennis Podcast with me, your host, Ben Larcombe.